Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently, who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with Ray Bradbury, who died at the age of 91, and he had a profound effect on our culture. One of the great writers of the 20th century and into the 21st century. He was a science fiction writer, although he didn't like to identify himself as that. He liked to identify himself as a fantasy writer. Like most science fiction writers, he wasn't talking about the future, even though he did predict a number of things, including robots and space travel. He liked to talk about the present and the past. In fact, one of his famous quotes was, "I wasn't trying to predict the future, I was trying to prevent it." He was a nice Swedish boy who was born in Waukegan, Illinois, one of the two famous people from Waukegan, Illinois, along with Jack Benny, about 15 miles from where I'm broadcasting. And even though he moved out to Los Angeles during the Depression when he was a teenager, Waukegan remained an influence throughout his life. It was a Midwestern sensibility, and his town, Greentown, that was in many of his stories, was based on his experiences in Waukegan. He became that rare avis in Los Angeles. He never learned to drive, but he was affected by the movies and all of the culture out there. He read a lot, and he started writing short stories when short stories were the coin of the realm and magazines were willing to buy them. He wrote a number of famous books, including the Martian Chronicles, which presaged a lot of the things that Robert Heinlein did, and Something Wicked This Way Comes, which presaged a lot of what Stephen King did. He had an immense influence on both writers and readers, but his most famous work was Fahrenheit 451. Fahrenheit 451 refers to the temperature at which paper burns, and here he tells the story of his most famous work.
So I didn't make it to college. I got a job selling newspapers on the street corner. I made $10 a week. And 3 nights a week, I went to the library. And that's where I learned how to write. I loved reading books, sitting in the middle of the library with the vibrations of the great authors impinging on me. When I heard about Hitler burning the books in the streets of Berlin, it bothered me terribly. I was 15 when that happened. I was already in love with libraries. So he was burning me when he did that. And I heard the Russians doing that secretly. They didn't do it in the streets, but they burned books and they burned authors, which was even worse. And I heard about the burning of the books in Alexandria, Egypt, 5,000 years ago. So you see, the reason I wrote Fahrenheit is because I'm a library person. And I'm in danger, I thought, of someday writing something that people might not like and they might burn. So it was only natural at the age of 26 that I sat down and wrote Fahrenheit 451. And thank God that I did.
Well, that's for sure. Thank God that he did. Fahrenheit 451 is one of the enduring classics of American literature. If he hadn't written anything besides that, he would be one of the great American authors. But he wrote plenty. As I said, he wrote short stories. He wrote screenplays. He wrote the screenplay for John Huston for the 1956 Moby Dick, and it was quite well done. He also wrote for television. He wrote for Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and Rod Serling loved him. Trust me, Rod Serling knew great writers. Here's a little bit of a clip he wrote for one Rod Serling Twilight Zone episode called I Sing the Body Electric from the poem by Walt Whitman.
Can they build a machine like a human?
I don't know.
It doesn't sound so good.
Maybe we ought to investigate. I sing the body electric. They make a fairly convincing pitch here. It doesn't seem possible, though, to find a woman who must be 10 times better than Mother in order to seem half as good. Except, of course, in the Twilight Zone.
Ironically, I never thought his television screenplays or most of the movie versions of his books came off that well, but it didn't really matter that much because he was so great if you read his things. That was the key. He was a big one on reading, and he despaired that reading may be dying. 2004, President Bush presented him with the National Medal of the Arts, and he spent much of his life doing conferences and talking to people. He loved to talk about writing, and here he is talking about his own career.
I suppose you wonder why I've called you all here. I want to identify myself. I'm Ray Bradbury. But you're very curious, aren't you, to find out how I fell in love with books. I learned to read when I was 3 years old. I loved comic strips. I loved the cartoons on Sunday. And I got a book of fairy tales when I was 5 years old, and I fell in love with reading. And when I was 6, I saw a film on dinosaurs, and dinosaurs filled my life. A thing that begins when you're 3 and 6 and 10 and 12 wind up in your fictions when you're in your 30s. The things that you do should be things that you love, and things that you love should be things that you do. I was 7 years old when I went to the library for the first time, and I was hoping to find books about the Land of Oz by L. Frank Baum and Tarzan by Edgar Rice Burroughs. That was a great adventure. And I'd open the door of the library and I'd look in, and all those people were waiting for me in there. You see, libraries is people. People are waiting in there. Thousands of people who wrote the books. My greatest influences are John Steinbeck. I read The Grapes of Wrath when I was 19 years old. So you find the author who can lead you through the dark. And Shakespeare started me there, and Hamlet started me there, and Richard III, and Emily Dickinson led the way for me. And Edgar Allan Poe said, "This way, here's the light." That's what a library is. So you go into the library and discover yourself. Long at night when I was 12 years old, and I looked at the planet Mars, and I said, "Take me home." And the planet Mars took me home. I never came back. So I've written every day. In the last 75 years, I've never stopped writing. We should learn from history about the destruction of books. When I was 15 years old, Hitler burned books in the streets of Berlin. So I learned then how dangerous it all was, because if you didn't have books and the ability to read, you couldn't be part of any civilization. You couldn't be part of a democracy. If you know how to read, you have a complete education about life, then you know how to vote within a democracy. But if you don't know how to read, you don't know how to decide. That's the great thing about our country, is we are a democracy of readers, and we should keep it that way. I published the first version of Fahrenheit in February 1951. When I moved into LA with my family, I had 2 daughters. I needed an office because my daughters were very loud and wonderful and lovely, but I had no money for an office. I was wandering around up at UCLA, and I heard typing in a room down in the basement. And I went down to the basement, and I found a room had 12 typewriters in it. I could rent a typewriter for 10 cents a half hour. So I said, "My God, this is my office." Doesn't matter, I was surrounded by students. I got a bag of dimes. I moved into the typing room in the basement of the library, and I spent $9 and $9.80, and I wrote Fahrenheit 451. So you see, what a place for Fahrenheit 451 to be written in the library of all places where it wasn't being burned. So I made a contract with Valentine, and I went to the library again, with the typing in the typing room, and I added 25,000 words. How did I do that? I got the characters to come to me. Montag came and said, "Do you know who I am completely?" I said, "No." I said, "Tell me." And the fire chief came to me, and he told me about his prior life. I said to the fire chief, "Why did you burn books?" And he told me. And Clarice McClellan came, who was a 16-year-old girl who was in love with books and libraries and life. Clarice is me. Clarice McClellan is Ray Bradbury, the young boy who fell in love with life. And Clarice is the essence of life and the essence of love. You see, all my characters write the book. I don't write the book. All these characters come to me and say, "Listen to me." And then I listen to them, and I put it down, and the book gets written. That's how I write, you see. All these lovers surround me, and they love life, and they tell me about it. At the center of my books is the gift of life. The reason why my books are popular because they know I'm a lover. When people touch my books, they are alive. So that's the gift I give to them, and I want them to carry them back and forth to the library. Books are smart and brilliant and wise. Love what you do and do what you love. Don't listen to anyone else who tells you not to do it. You do what you want, what you love. But imagination should be the center of your life. Fantasy at the center of your life. I'm going to have a t-shirt made. It says, stand at the top of the cliff and jump off and build your wings on the way down. We are all the sons and the daughters of time. So I thank the universe for making life on Earth and allowing me to come alive here.
Ray Bradbury, one of the truly greats. We'll certainly miss him, but we have his writings forever. We're going to close tonight with Richard Dawson, who became one of the top television personalities in the United States. Very talented guy from England, born in Gosford, England, and he died recently at the age of 79. He was a sort of a song and dance man and told jokes. In the 1950s, he was known as Dickie Dawson, and he got his first big break when he married Diana Dors. Diana Dors was sort of the Marilyn Monroe, Jane Mansfield of Britain in the 1950s, a platinum blonde, buxom, sexy, involved in all sorts of scandal, but quite talented also. Some of the English papers implied that Richard Dawson married her to further his career, and it certainly did further his career, but they were married for about 7 years, and here he is as a young man, Dickie Dawson, on the Diana Dors television show in 1959 with an American couple who was big at the time, Jack Cassidy and Shirley Jones. This is one of the first British variety shows on television.
Jack Cassidy!
Oh, hello there. Oh, Shirley. Miss Dawes, how are you?
Hello. Say, how long have you been married?
We've been married 3 years.
Oh, really? Well, I've only been married 3 weeks. You know, as a matter of fact, I'd like you to meet my husband, too. Dickie Dawson, come on out here.
I've heard of getting friendly on plane trips, but this is ridiculous. Dick. Yeah? How are you? Oh, hello. Hello. How are you? Good evening, sir.
Well, now, just a minute. There's something wrong here. I know what it is. I'm on the wrong side. I should be standing over here. That's it.
Well, you should be over here. There you
You're
go.
wonderful at arranging. Back.
Shall we, Jack? I think so. Ladies, they can't even move without me. So right. Without me, she's nothing. Without me, she's nowhere.
Without me, there's something missing. Without me, he's got no smile.
Please them and their sweet kissing.
Their lips are out of style.
So Dickie Dawson started out sort of like Jack Cassidy, a good-looking song and dance man with some acting talent. He got his big break on American television in 1963 on the Dick Van Dyke Show when he played Racy Tracy Radigan, the British star who wound up incurring Rob's wrath because ultimately he put the moves on Laura.
Here he is, your star and new host, Tracy Radigan. Hello, lovey. Sally Rogers.
Sally Rogers. What a pretty name.
Oh, but thank you.
Miss Rogers, or may I call you Sally?
Please do.
I want you to consider me your humble servant.
Humble servant?
Of course.
Well, now, about your days off.
How delightful. Beauty and wit, eh?
Hey, Mr. Radigan, I'm Buddy Sorrell.
A pleasure shaking your talented hand, Mr. Sorrell. I really mean it. You do look like a writer. You're that same clinical, observant look that I've seen in the eyes of all great men of letters that I've met.
Well, gee, thanks very
No,
much.
I'm very sincere. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
You must be Rob Petrie, huh? I know it's going to be fun working with all of you. I've admired your work so much.
Thank you.
I really have.
Tracy, you're in good hands now. I'll leave. If there's anything you want, just call me.
I'll tell you what to call him.
I really don't see a thing here. This group can keep me quite happy, thanks. But thank you for looking after me.
Fine.
Absolutely. Now listen, Dan, I got a great idea. Come on over here. Let's all sit down on the floor.
A year later, he hit it big as one of the regulars on Hogan's Heroes, the comic takeoff on Stalag 17, the comedy about the German prison camp. He was great with dialects. I mean, you can listen to him throughout his career and you notice all the different dialects he did. And he offered to do a Liverpudlian, a Scouse dialect. And Mike Dan, who was the head of programming for CBS, said, no, this Liverpudlian thing, this Scouse thing will never catch on, despite the fact that the Beatles had already made it into the United States. They told Richard Dawson, do a Cockney accent, be one of these Cockney sort of clever criminal types as a prisoner of war. And he did that. And right after they filmed their pilot, Hard Day's Night came out. And he went back to Mike Dan and said, I think you may have made a mistake about that Liverpudlian accent not catching on. Here he is with Sergeant Schultz playing cards in the barracks.
Now, the question is, does the beastly hand need this? Or don't you?
What's the idea?
I got to think about that, Carl.
This place is finally getting to you, huh?
Yeah. Whatever gave you that idea, Schultz?
Yeah, he liked to say that Hogan's Heroes lasted 6 years, 1 year longer than Hitler did. Good line by Richard Dawson. By the way, I read somewhere that he was the one who introduced Bob Crane to a guy named John Carpenter. John Carpenter was the guy who was into audio-visual taping very early on, and Bob Crane and he got together and they sort of videotaped all their sexual exploits, and it got to be a real seamy thing if you've seen the movie Autofocus. And he was ultimately tried for the murder of Bob Crane about all that stuff. He was acquitted, but I read that it was Richard Dawson who actually introduced those two. Little bit of trivia. In any event, Richard Dawson went on to do Laugh-In for a little while, and then he went on to do a bunch of sitcoms and minor game shows in the 70s. One of my favorites was when he did The Odd Couple with Jack Klugman and Tony Randall, playing a former partner of Felix's during World War II.
Something I have to tell you now. It's like playing dirty fool doing it on the show. But what? But we have a mutual friend.
What, the little blonde at reception? I've seen her once.
No. Felix Unger.
Huh?
Felix Unger.
I used to do an act with a guy in England named Felix Unger.
That's the guy.
Oh, we used to do camp shows for the troops. Huh? We were the worst act in the world.
The most horrible act in the history of show business.
Was that bad?
Bad? We finished the show one night. General Patton came backstage and slapped us both. Twice.
That's not true. We had a wonderful act.
Bill?
Funny stuff. In any event, he went on and he did Family Feud, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but he got a reputation as a game show host, and he never really broke out of it. I think he could have probably done other stuff, but he was so good on Family Feud that that's where he wound up. He actually parodied his game show host status in the one movie he did. He was in The Running Man, and here he is as sort of a demented game show host taunting Arnold Schwarzenegger, who has to get in his famous line.
You showed up in Bakersfield. Well, first, I've got a little surprise for you. We all know you're a big, tough guy, Ben, but that doesn't mean that you're a loner, and it takes a big man to admit that he needs his friends. We didn't want to break up a winning team, Ben, so here they are, ready to go for broke, right by your side. Ladies and gentlemen, Ben's buddies. What's inside the zone? The runners have 3 hours. They've got to go through all 4 game plots. 3 hours or less, and they're going to need every second, because you know who's on their tail? Who? And you know what happens then? What? Right, without further ado, it's time to start running! On your marks. Get set.
Killian, I'll be back.
Only in a rerun. Go!
Notice how his accent changes over the course of his career. Well, again, his biggest role was as the host of Family Feud, and here's the famous last episode that he did of Family Feud, where he breaks up and he has a good line at the end, and this is what made Richard Dawson a household name in the United States.
I really thank you, but listen, please sit down, and that was very touching, but I got to do at least 30 minutes of fun and laughter, and you make me want to cry when you give me that kind of welcome, and I think you've succeeded. It's our last show, and I have to tell you that whoever wins this and they play, normally they come back. They won't. Why'd you do that to me?
Because they love you, Richard.
You can stop me again here, please. I got it. Listen. That's very touching, but I'm double parked, and so we have to get on with this.
They did love Richard Dawson. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Taps. And of course, Richard Dawson's famous trademark was that he would kiss all the women on Family Feud. So as a final tribute to Richard Dawson, we're going to do the Crystals with a Phil Spector song from 1963.